Welcome to today's episode of the Untold, the show where we have great guests and their individual stories. I'm your host Abdullah Hindiani, and for today's episode we have a very distinguished guest. He is Mansour Alawadhi, who's a comic book creator, and I believe he's the first type of comic book creator that we have on the Untold. So I'm very excited to talk to him, discover this medium, especially for someone like me who read a very few number of comic books. So I'm very curious to see this art form. With that in mind, stay tuned until after the break. And we're back with Mansour Alawadhi, and I want to first welcome you on the Untold.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to be here with you guys.
Well, it's such a pleasure, especially for me personally, because let's first introduce you to the audience. You're a comic book writer, and for someone like me who spent a lot of his childhood reading comic books, although illegally, if I would say so, I'm very, happy to have you here.
I'm happy to be here with you guys too, and I'm very eager to share my experience with all of you as well.
Yeah. And speaking of that experience, just introduce yourself to the audience, right? Just give us the brief one-on-one.
Sure. My name is Mansour Alawadhi. By day, I'm a petroleum engineer,
MashaAllah.
and by night, I draw comics and write books and novels as well. So in a way, I live like dual lives,
Yeah.
if we can call that or say that. I'm married. I have 3 kids,
MashaAllah.
and I manage my life between my responsibilities and my hobbies and interests as well, whether it's about reading, comics, drawings, and novels and writings as well.
Yeah. I love how you put it that, by day I'm an engineer, by night I'm a writer, which is a very cool duality and an analogy to comic book, stories where you have superheroes with dual
True.
personalities.
True.
And speaking of the medium itself, comic books, what would you say was or among your favorite comic books, growing up and reading them, even now?
Well, as a child, let's say I'm not a child anymore, but during my childhood, let's
Yeah.
say during the 80s and my teenage year during the 90s, I was fascinated by American comic books, mostly like Superman and Batman's. They were like always my idols during that time. Um, Along with that, of course, I was very much eager to and fascinated by the Japanese anime and manga as well, through the TV shows and other shows that we used to watch either in KTV1 or KTV2 during that time.
Yeah.
So most likely, let's say my idols when it comes to the comics is mostly in the American comic books, which is ultimately the most famous of them all, Superman and Batman.
Yeah. So would you say that's the period of time that started your love for comic books, or did you grow loving it later on?
No, it was during my childhood because I used to watch the series, the cartoons, and try to draw them as well.
Yeah.
So I had this interest of translating what I'm seeing into a work of art.
Oh, okay.
I still have, drawings from my when I was 5 or 6 year old. I was drawing Superman, for example,
Oh,
and sometimes I compare it to my drawings now, which is like 40 years apart.
yeah, mashallah.
That's one of the things that
Like you have a walk through history, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And we had, this love for these comics came from, either watching the TV shows.
Yeah.
I still remember the first Superman movie I watched with my brother-in-law. He brought it to us at home, and we watched it. Was Superman 3 by Christopher Reeve. He was
Christopher
like,
Reeves, yeah. Yeah.
the best Superman. Um, I remember the first Batman movie of Michael Keaton. I watched it right after the invasion in 1991,
Yeah.
1991 or 92 probably, but after the invasion.
Yeah.
Okay. Beside that, when we had these book fairs, like the yearly annual book fairs, I used to go there and search for comic books if possible. And one of the stories that I have, I think I was in the I'm not sure. I think I was in elementary school.
Okay.
It's a memory with my father, God bless his soul. I
Yeah,
mean, we
look.
went both to annual book fair, and then he wanted me to look through the books, and I remember I picked up a comic book for DC superheroes,
Yeah.
Superman, Batman, and it was in Arabic.
Do you
That book.
remember the title?
Actually, no.
Oh,
I just remember the memory, and I
yeah.
remember that when I gave it to my dad, my father,
Yeah.
and he took the book and he started, browsing and looking at the pages, flipping the pages, and I saw his like was kind of he had a grumpy face while
Oh,
looking,
yeah.
and I was expecting a lecture
Okay.
that what I bring you to the comic book fair and then you end up
You go to the comics.
exactly and
Yeah.
buy a comic, and but you know what? He didn't say anything. He just bought me the book.
Yeah. I mean, that's
And
good. I think he saw the potential and your love for it.
maybe I don't know
Yeah.
yet, and but it's one of the beautiful memories I still have from my father, and
Yeah.
which is related to my interests and my hobbies as well.
Yeah.
So it's since childhood, and I had that. Then I started developing it with time, of course.
Yeah. And speaking of developing it, this can segue into my next question is that when did you decide to create your own kind of comics?
Well, the idea was there since I was young,
Oh,
and
okay.
and I had multiple experiences or attempts, let's say,
Yeah.
but none of them were official. Like I remember, I'm one of the I studied my major in petroleum engineering abroad. I went to the U.S.
MashaAllah.
And then when I went to the U.S., I remember during that time I brought and drew a comic series.
So this is while you were studying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it was in Arabic, and I made like a one series, but I didn't continue it. I called it Kuwaiti in USA. Basically, it was reflecting the life of any Kuwaiti student when he goes to the
To the
US and
US.
the culture shock and everything
Yeah.
he notices that and what he faces and goes through. Uh, After that, but of course, it was just for me, or and I will post it in any website. Um, Later on, I had multiple attempts to do it, but again, none of them they were serious until in 2020 during the COVID time when we got locked up
Yeah.
and we had nothing to do and just to sit and wait for this whole pandemic and how it goes. Then the idea came to me to publish and write a comic book. And what I did this time for that book is, and I published it. Eventually, I did draw and write the book, and I published it in 19. It was published in 1921. Sorry, in 2021.
2020.
It's called أبعاد Comics or Comic
Oh, okay.
Dimensions.
Yeah.
It was basically, it wasn't about superheroes or villains or people who can fly and have muscle. No, it was basically a comic book about comics itself,
Oh,
about
so
what
it's like
exactly
it's a
informative.
breaking the fourth wall kind of thing.
Exactly,
Yeah.
what is comic?
Oh,
I mean, we see people rush into, to watch the comic book movies in theaters. We see they go to bookstores to buy the latest
yeah.
editions of every superhero they love. We hear about this artist or that actor who will play such a character. But again, what is this based for? What is comic?
Oh,
And
okay.
how it is
Yeah.
related to us in our daily life. So what I did is I wrote a book about that and I drew it. So it's basically a comic book which basically the main focus or let's say the storyteller in
Yeah.
the book.
But it's kind of educational as well.
Exactly, it's
Yeah.
about the comics and the history of comics and how it's related to our culture and
Yeah.
also our Arabic culture and everything else.
Yeah, and honestly, the thing that kind of stood out to me in that story is that you said it was during the COVID time. And mashallah, for so many of our guests we've had on the Untold, a lot of them kickstarted their, I would say, the thing they love is because of that period of time where they could actually do it. So there's a little blessing in that kind of pandemic era.
The funny thing is, I remember during the COVID time, I'm a petroleum engineer. I work in the oil fields as well, and
Yeah.
I do the visits to the fields. And I remember when the COVID struck us, then we had to limit the people who go to work and even go to the field. And I remember I told my team leader at that time because I was assigned to do a couple of jobs,
Yeah.
and I told him now it's my time, so I need to get the authorities approval to go out and do things. But he said, no, Mansour, we have enough people to go, and we're like stuck to very limited people, so I'd rather that you just stay at home and not go to
Yeah.
work because I assigned other people.
Yeah.
And it kind of agitated me, because during the COVID time I didn't feel like I want to sit and do nothing. I felt like it's our duty to do something and help the country and
Yeah.
do the work. So, but again, it turned out to be an opportunity to do something else, and then I
Yeah.
ended up drawing, publishing a book, and that unlocked a lot of other opportunities that I explored
Yeah, mashallah.
later on.
And speaking of that book, and especially the comic book itself, do you have a genre in particular that you write in, or is it something more open to interpretation?
More open. I wouldn't say a specific genre, because the comic book that what I wrote, like I said, I wasn't my intention wasn't to go through to explore another superhero or go through the superhero genres, because
Yeah,
what I see is the world is full of superheroes.
right. Yeah,
Okay, I'm not gonna add anything new to it. That was my idea when it came to the book. But rather than, I wanted to educate people and inform them about what it means. But despite that, I had other ideas where, I was mentioning that I need to do a full story now this time,
Oh,
or
okay.
let's say
Yeah.
more like a one shot or a graphic novel. And it doesn't have to be, it could be I would say fantasy, for example,
Right.
because this will attract a lot of young audience as well.
Yeah. And speaking on that point, why do you think the superhero genre in particular is very popular for comic books, as opposed to other genres?
Well, let me put it this way. I mean, the core or the base of the comic books is related to the superheroes.
Right, yeah.
Okay, if we go a little bit, to the history to the past. Okay, when did the let's say modern comic book started? The golden age of the comic books started like in the late 1930s with
Yeah.
Superman and Action Comics one. Now, there were comics before Superman. There were comics, but they were more focused on, let's say, the adventure
Yeah.
side of the characters. Either by fighting crime or or exploration or
Yeah.
whatsoever. Now, what happened is when Superman came, first published in 1938, it shifted and changed the whole concept
It
of
revolutionized the characters.
exactly.
Yeah.
They brought up Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel, both who created Superman. They brought let's say, a modern mythology to a superhuman,
Yeah.
okay, or a character, let's say, with a superhuman ability, okay, that was never been mentioned, okay, or interpreted before,
Right, yeah.
okay, to the world. And that was like with visuals, with characters and with drawings and everything. So yes, the core base is very much dependent on the superheroes
Right,
when
yeah.
it comes to the comics.
And also I think because, superheroes in general, if you see them, in live action, you don't have as big suspension of disbelief as you have when you're reading about them or in comic books. So you are much more to believe them and believe their actions if they're in comic book form.
Not just that, now again, where do the superheroes come from? If you look at, again, and I will give an example of Superman. He's my favorite superhero.
Yeah, I mean, he's the original, right?
He's the original. He's
Yeah.
the most famous character and everything. Okay, Superman himself comes from the interpretation of Superman.
Right.
Okay, it doesn't come from it didn't come out of the blue. The creator of Superman, they put their own characteristics into Superman.
Yeah.
What does he represent? Okay, he has mythological, aspects. Some people look into it. For example, other than Hercules, there were stories, okay, prior to the comics for H.G. Wells, I think. It's called The Man of Tomorrow. Basically, it's about a man with super abilities.
Right.
Okay, the characters themselves, Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel, they were basically immigrants. They were Canadians who came to the U.S. and lived during the recession years in the 1920s and 30s, and they faced all sort of poverty and injustice and whatsoever. So they tried to blend in a society. So they have their own interpretation, their own personality within that character itself.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you look into and that's one story. Okay, That's Superman. If you take another character, for example, Batman, for example, and he who was raised as without a mother and father.
Without a mother, yeah.
Okay, so in a way, he's
It's
an orphan.
one of the most popular kind of
Exactly.
tragedy stories in comic books.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's an orphan basically,
Right,
and
yeah.
you know, he had learned to grow up by himself, and then he saw the crime in front of his eyes, and he decided to use his powers and abilities to fight the crime and bring justice and so. Everyone loves superheroes because they see themselves, or maybe what they are capable of,
Right.
in these superheroes.
Yeah. And we are going to go on a very quick break,
Sure.
but I do want to highlight that, like you said, I think the reason why a lot of people connect them is because of each decade of time they were released in, they reflected the idea or the personalities or the, you know, the pursuits of whatever dreams they had at the moment. But on that note, we are going to take a very quick break and we'll come right back after this one.
Yeah.
And we're back with Mansour Alawadhi. I want to ask you straight to the point.
Sure.
I want to put you on the spot. I want to talk to you about the creative process because there's a lot of nuances in writing and making comic books. So I want you to talk us through that process, you know, in general.
Let me clarify one thing.
Right.
Comic books, if you grab any comic book, okay, and you just look into the cover, okay, you will see the title and beautiful cover picture of what the superhero or the supervillain or which shows up tells about the content. But then again, you go through a list of names,
Right.
okay, you will see the creator or the writer of the comic book. Then you will see the painter,
Yeah.
the inker, and there will be someone who's just, you know, editor, you know. So basically this comic book, and it comes into maybe 20-30 pages, when we see it is a very small book, you know, full of drawings and speech balloons and so on. So, you know, it's a work, it's a combined group, it's a work of a combined efforts.
Yeah.
You would really, you know, say it's similar to a TV show or a movie where you have a director, actors, writers, editors, cameraman, and so on, so to come up with one comic book to write it, okay, or let's say come up with the whole comic book in terms of the storytelling, the dialogue itself, the scenario, the characters, and what they're special, and the editor, the inker, so it's not easy.
Oh, it's like a very delicate and complicated group project.
It is.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, you combine all of those people together,
Right.
and to come up with a series of one book or whatsoever. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when I reflect this to my experience, I wrote a book from the scratch by myself. It was my idea. I did the drawings, and I worked on the dialogues. I did a lot of homework in search and history. I did the design and everything, and I published the book eventually with a publisher. But of course, to overcome such, or let's say, one of these obstacles, for example, I intended that my book to be, for example, let's say 90% of the book in black and white.
Yeah.
I didn't do the coloring, and I intended to do it as a simple drawing, not a detailed drawing, because this will save me a lot of time and effort in order to publish the book eventually. And but it worked. So can you publish a book from the scratch? Can you work on a book? Yes, of course, but it should be, or I mean, it's better if it's a group of people, and that's what we see in every comic book now.
Oh yeah. So which one do you prefer? Because I know you also said that you wrote novels. So the solo approach to writing, or do you prefer the group approach to writing?
Now, today here we're talking about comic books, but the novels, for example, which is very funny because, you know, I published my first comic book. I mean, and then I was thinking about to publish the second book.
Right.
And I had a script and a scenario. Then I remember one day I was sitting and I was just going through it, and of course I didn't even finish that script. Then I said, let me work more on the script, and then while I'm still working on it and writing and typing, just the idea came to me, why don't I publish it as a novel instead?
Oh, so midway you kind of switched.
Exactly.
Right.
And why did I do that? Because I was thinking now, it looked to me that it's a very big project,
Yeah.
and if I wanted to have the time, I wouldn't have the time to do the drawings and the dialogues, and rather than doing that, I transferred all my thoughts into a novel. So it kind of made a switch, and it's I know it's interesting because when I look into some of famous authors, which
Yeah.
we maybe probably discussed or didn't discuss yet, who has the same kind of a interest. For example, Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman,
The Sandman.
the Sandman. He also, he's a comic book writer,
Yeah.
but he also wrote a novel which called American Gods,
Oh, yeah.
if I'm not
Which
mistaken.
they made into a TV show as well.
Exactly. I didn't see it, but I heard that they made it into a TV show.
Yeah.
Okay. And he has multiple books. He has a book called Norse mythology,
Right.
which talks about all of these Viking, mythical stories in a very simple, beautiful way. And he writes, it represents it. There is also an author, a Canadian author, I think. Her name is Margaret Atwood. She's like,
Yeah.
switched
I
between
think
comic.
that she's the one who made The Handmaid's Tale.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And also she switched to comics books, and I don't recall the names,
Oh, yeah.
but there is a let's say a thin line between comics and novels.
Right. Yeah.
Except that the difference is basically comics is there, it's with visuals and
Yeah.
and pictures. Okay, where here in the novels you're just interpreting that into words
Yeah.
and dialogues and more like a feeling, adding more feelings and depth
Yeah.
to it.
And I totally get that because you kind of reminded me of Gerard Way, who was the lead singer, I believe, of 30 Seconds to Mars, which was a band, right? American band. But he also was a great storyteller. So then he brought the team, illustrators, painters, and everything. And then he made the comic books, the Umbrella Academy. So he's the
Okay.
guy who actually wrote the Umbrella Academy. And so that just reminded me of his story, how he brought the team. He was good at writing stories, but he needed the painters, the inkers, all of that.
We have a Kuwaiti example here. I'm not sure
MashaAllah.
which is Dr. Naif Mtawa. Naif Mtawa.
Is it the 92 or something?
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Dr. Naif, I think he's a doctor in psychology, and he teaches in Kuwait universities, and
Right,
he has his own clinic and so on, studies and multiple PhDs and things.
Yeah.
Mashallah.
MashaAllah.
Other than that, he's a great storyteller. So I think he has a company called Tashkil, and that was probably 20 years ago, and he came up with a story that is called The 99.
The 99, right?
Yeah, but it was so much controversial at that time, which it had different interpretation.
Yeah.
Although he's been praised heavily from the Western civilization, even
He was, right.
Barack Obama, praised him by his name.
Yeah. And I want to illustrate that point because I was studying in the United States, and actually my professor is the one who brought his name. He's like, you have a comic book artist, and then they showed me yeah.
And that's one of the reasons, because what he brought, I mean, what his idea was to show let's say a modern Islam or Muslim superheroes, basically,
Yeah.
which was something has not been let's say familiar for the Western civilization.
Yeah.
But again, it was, like I said, it was kind of controversial
It
because
was ahead of his time.
Yeah.
Because a lot of comments, if you read on Kamala Khan, which is Miss Marvel, they say she was inspired by the characters from the 99.
And even I remember one time I visited their offices here in Kuwait, and one of my friends took me. That was, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago or so.
MashaAllah.
And what I know that when he did the project, he brought up all of the artists from, like, they were ex-Marvel or ex-DC.
Yeah.
So even the content that he produced, okay, at the end, okay, it was his story, his idea. But if you look through the books itself, okay, you will see the style of the American comics.
Yeah.
And like I said, it was praised and become so popular that he had a collaboration with DC Comics. He had, like, I think 6 editions or so, where you have the most powerful DC superheroes, like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. They team up with those Muslim superheroes to fight crime and
Yeah.
bring justice.
Yeah, like I said, it was really ahead of its time.
Yeah.
And I do want to circle back to you, especially as you roll as an artist, because I know for a lot of people are curious about the inspiration, right? Whenever you're trying to write a story, go through a journey, where do you get your inspiration from?
Okay. You know, the same question was asked to Stan Lee, but of course I'm not Stan Lee. Okay, and they told
Well,
me,
you are in a way, right?
okay.
I mean, Stanley himself would say you are better.
The man
Yeah.
himself.
He was very gracious.
Okay, the man himself, and that question was asked him one time, and said, "Where do you get the inspiration?" And he said, through daily life,
Daily life.
and observation.
Yeah.
When you're into something, the ideas will just pop in.
Right.
It just doesn't happen. Like, for example, the comic dimension, for example, the book that I published, Abad comics or comic dimensions. How did I get the idea for that book? Basically, I was reading multiple books about how to create comics.
Oh.
And those books, like, for example, the father of the modern comic books called Will Eisner, for example. He had a book, and he had comic books. He is famous for creating a character called the Spirit, and other books as well. There is also one of the great comic book writers, Scott McCloud, and what he did, Scott McCloud, he like published a couple of books about teaching about the comic, but he goes into more than just drawing comics, but about the history and everything. So they were great inspirations for me to come up with the idea. Even Stanley has a book or two about these kind of things. So those artists, like, for example, comic book creators, pioneers, Will Eisner, for example, he had a theory that, and he was very much, stick to that theory, that he wanted to present comics as not just books for children, but it's something that is, it's a form of an art. It's much more than that.
It's like the next step or the evolution of novels.
Exactly. And you can see that even through the graphic novels. There are beautiful, great graphic novels, and now they're being turned, these stories being turned to TV series, movies, and so on. So he wanted to have this idea that comic art itself, it has a beautiful, a long history. Okay, until it reached the modern form where we see the superheroes and supervillains and so. And it's not just meant, to be just another book for children. No, it is an art by itself. Like now they call it a pulp fiction or whatsoever. Okay, and in my book, basically I tried to get, that was so much. I was inspired by those ideas, and I wanted to represent it, and that's what I tried to do. Within the book that I published. So basically, I wanted to show the side of the comics that nobody knows, that it's not just another movie that you go watch, or a book that you buy and then you forget about.
Right. And because unfortunately we have run out of time, so we gotta conclude this segment. But I do want to highlight one key point you said, is that comic books, against stereotypes, it's not for children. There are so many mature stories in it, like Watchmen, 300, The Sandman, we've mentioned on the show. So it is a very great medium for storytelling. And with that point, I do want to thank you for joining us today on The Untold.
Thank you for having me here, and thanks for everyone in this program, and wish you the best luck, and I hope you read my book as well.
Thank you. I mean, inshallah, inshallah. I do love reading, so inshallah, if God allows it. And with that, we are finishing with the conversation segment of The Untold. Stay tuned after the break. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid we have ran out of time. This was another highly enjoyable episode. I really had fun time talking to him. Mansour, off camera, he was kind enough to share with us so many stories about comic books, the history of them, gave us some specific examples, talked to us a lot about his favorites and everything. He's a very tremendous guy to talk to, a lot of insight. He's like an encyclopedia of comic books. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today's episode of The Untold. Until next time, goodbye for now.